Hey, what's going on, everybody? Once again, thank you so much for joining me for another episode. I am Matthew. This is Watty's channel. And after a long time of talking about it, I have finally decided to bring my butt down here and start making a review video of the 1990s WCW Galoob figures. Now, I have actually done a couple of Galoob video reviews in the past, and these actually have been some of my least successful videos as far as view count in the past. Of course, when I did make these reviews, they were more like my favorite figures in order from least favorite to most favorite, etc. So not your prototypical review videos. And besides, at that time, all I had was loose figures. I didn't have anything on card. So this is a much more complete collection. Now, just like any of my other card figures, like your Remcos, Hasbro, Galoob, or Eljan, etc., I might have a good chunk, a majority of them. You know, we're talking 80 to 90% or more of the carded figures. So I don't have absolutely everything, but I do have enough to at least give you a pretty hands-on experience of what the figures will look like on card. The card backings themselves, relatively simple cards, nothing super flashy, nothing super special, but I do have certain things up on the back of the cards that I really enjoy, and we'll talk about those as well. As you know, kind of growing up in the era of the Galoob and Hasbro, you know, I was about 5 years old when both Hasbro and Galoob were released in the 1990 time frame, so I never got the opportunity to really experience LJN, you know, back in the day when they first came out with those action figures. A lot of people that did have LJNs as kids, I'm pretty sure they really enjoyed the Galoob line as well. Essentially, Galoobs mimicked LJNs as far as they were stationary figures. They had no movable joints or anything like that. You couldn't move arms or legs up or down or anything like that. So anyone who were playing with these 8-inch rubber figures, you know, were very already accustomed to playing with these non-movable figures. So when Galoob came out, they were just, you know, miniaturized 4-inch figures. And with the bendies, you know what, they probably already had, you know, experienced the 4-inch figures anyways. The Galoobs, as far as display of the figures, they look amazing. I'll give them that. They really are little miniature statues. The problem I have with the line, and for a good chunk of my life, like probably 95% of my life, I always said that Galoob was my second favorite toy line. Now, growing up, my family, we had Hasbro figures, we had a little bit of Galoob figures, and we basically had whatever else we could find laying around the house that we could use as wrestling toys. So, yeah, Galoob I classified as my second favorite toy line, but it was more about my default favorite toy line. You know, I really didn't enjoy the figures per se, even though it did produce my all-time favorite figure. As I've grown up and started collecting over the last couple of years, they've significantly fallen further and further down my list as among the toy lines. A good chunk of the action figures, in my opinion, are mediocre, you know, average to below average figures. There's really only about 2 or 3 figures that I really put in the higher echelon of playability among the figures, but we'll take a look at each individual figure per line. So we're looking at 12 wrestlers, 13 figures in Series 1, and we're looking at about the same thing or so, maybe about 15 figures or so in Series 2. I didn't actually count them, so it might be a little bit more than that in Series 2. But I think the total is like 31 figures, if I'm not mistaken. So if we're looking at 13, so probably 18 figures in Series 2. But enough chit-chat. We're going to dive into the figures and take a look. Start off with none other than the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. Because, of course, Ric Flair is going to have an action figure. So when it comes to these figures, I'm basically going to go in order of how they are displayed on the back of the card. So the card itself, as I mentioned, is a very simple card backing. Nothing super flashy, But the thing that I do like about it is that it gives like this little bio card, and it gives a name, it gives like a little nickname, etc. Their height, their weight, finishing moves, whatnot. I like their holds, the little models, and so forth. Another downside that I don't like about the card, I would much prefer to have their actual action figure on the back as opposed to the picture. When Galoob transitioned to original San Francisco a few years later, they did the exact same thing. They had the person's picture as opposed to their actual figure, so that really, frustrated me with, the Galoob action figures, or the Galoob, I forget his first name. Is it John Galoob or something like that? So Galoob is obviously a family name, and that's where the company name Galoob comes from. I forget the guy's first name, though. But I'm trying to look at these cards because sometimes, and I just found this out probably in the last year and a half or so, when you actually look at these cards, sometimes when you look at the bottom, underneath the bubbles, it'll say like NWA or whatnot. So I was never big on territories and stuff like that. So when I think of like AWA, NWA / WCW, WWF, stuff like that. NWA was like your major hub, I guess, or WCW was like your hub, and then you had like the little territories in between, your Mid Atlantic, your Georgia, maybe Florida or something, like your different territories that really fell under the realm of the WCW NWA umbrella or whatnot. So Ric Flair, whether he was an AWA wrestler, NWA / WCW, WWF, he's one of those characters, kind of like right there with, Dusty Rhodes. No matter where he goes, he will always be a legendary figurehead. And I had this figure as a kid. One of my favorite Galoob action figures, as a matter of fact. By today's standards, would I covet it the same way? No. Why? Because there's just so many other great figures. But as a kid, I really didn't have that many figures to work with. So yes, of course, having this figure as a kid, you work with what you have available. And among the Galoob figures, this was one of the top-notch action figures. But you'll find many Galoob figures operating in much the same way, where the figures they're slouched over, knees separated, hands spread apart. Not a huge fan of that, but it's a playable action figure. And for the longest time, this really was the only Ric Flair figure I ever knew about, until the collecting days really took full force, and then I started seeing all the other action figures. Even Hasbro. I never knew about Series 6 Ric Flair Hasbro. Not until I started collecting those a couple years ago. The Hasbro really didn't do him justice. This one, is it my favorite Ric Flair action figure? It is not, but it's still one of the better figures among the Galoob line. Still, to me, if I had to rate it, an average figure, 4.5 out of 10, 5 out of 10. It's okay. It's not the best. It's a serviceable figure. Another key member of part of Ric Flair's faction, WCW had the Four Horsemen, and Ric Flair and Arn Anderson were two key members of that faction. Arn Anderson, later on in the late 1980s, he and Tully Blanchard tag teamed for the Brainbusters, managed by Bobby Heenan. But to me, he's like one of those characters that no matter how much time they spend in the WWF, I classify Legion of Doom, Nasty Boys, Steiner Brothers, Vader, Ric Flair. I classify all these guys as WCW guys. No, I don't care how much time they spend in WWF. To my mindset, they will always be WCW wrestlers. Arn Anderson, same kind of deal. There have been so many members of the Four Horsemen. Ric Flair and Arn Anderson always seem to be the premier staples of the organization. Arn Anderson, Ole Anderson, Sid Vicious, Brian Pillman, Lex Luger, Sting, Chris Benoit. I mean, the list just goes on. Barry Windham. So, just a crazy amount. This one, I actually like about this. What I like about this one is he does have the bald spot in this card, and that's pretty awesome. They call him the Enforcer. So here's something I find interesting. The little tag up here, $3.99 for this figure back in the day, and when I think of WCW Galoob action figures, as a kid, to the best of my knowledge, I remember seeing your Hasbro figures in Toys R Us. I never saw them anywhere else but Toys R Us. I remember them being like $2, $3, $5 figures, whatever they were, back in the 90s. And the Galoobs, there was this, I was obviously born and raised in Chicago, and there was this dollar store down Western Avenue. For those who are not from Chicago, not gonna know what I'm talking about, but it was this big dollar store, and whenever we'd go in there, that would really be the only place I'd ever seen, Galoob figures, was in that dollar store. And that's why I kind of classify the Galoob figures as your action figures over the train tracks. Your where Hasbro, where your Beverly Hills type of action figures. These were less than ideal figures for collectors or for kids, for play, whatnot. So, Arn Anderson, again, is he a solid action figure? Another one that I classify as about a 4, maybe 4.5 out of 10. So I do have both variants. One variant with the bald spot, one variant without. So that's pretty awesome to have both of these action figures. It is still, among the Galoob line, one of the better figures. I mean, the Galoob, as I mentioned, don't exactly have the best poses overall. That's why I kind of say sometimes that I feel like Galoob has produced some of the worst action figures ever. But they're playable figures. I mean, what more can you ask for? They're playable. They're serviceable for a kid. I, as an adult, if I want to sit there and wrestle them, I can do so. Will I enjoy it? I'll get some satisfaction, I guess. They're not terrible. You got the little AA for Arn Anderson right underneath the belts. And that's another great thing about every single action figure does come with its own championship belt. Generic belts, gold plastic belts with like WCW written on it. To me, these are actually some of the best championship belts out there. I remember watching a video probably a year ago, and I kind of laughed at it. And, guys were making a video about those stupid laminate Velcro belts. And they're talking about how the WCW Galoob belts were crap, and how these little paper laminated belts with little Velcro, those things don't stick. The snap sucks. They break off. They don't stay together further. They're just trash. I own like 1 million of them for Hasbro and for LJN. Some of them are better than others, of course, but the majority of what I own, I buy them because I want figures to have belts, but I'm not a fan of them. But I just had to kind of laugh it off that they actually thought that those belts were better than these. I'm like, no. Not even close. So, kind of like the same thing with your original San Francisco toy makers that you would find years later. A lot of time you saw these figures on single card, and what did they do? They came back out and released those exact same figures on dual card. So, obviously, this is the US release. Pretty much the exact same information that you would find on the back of a single card, you have right here on the back of the dual card. And just to confirm, just to see if there's anything different on here, the Enforcer, 6 feet, 249, Minneapolis, Minnesota, DDT's Spine Buster, a powerful member of the Four Horsemen. Yep, so it does say the exact same thing. No difference. So these are really what I cover, is these 2-packs. I got a good collection of the 2-packs, but there's still a number of them that I'm missing. So this is the first set of 2-packs that I own. So after looking at Ric Flair and Arn Anderson, next up, Barry Windham. This is not a figure I had as a kid. Not a character I even knew about up until a couple years ago when I started my collecting, and I am so glad I started, I really got into the Galoob again. Obviously, the Hasbros, for the nostalgia reason, I really wanted those figures again. And because I had Galoob and because they didn't have that many figures, I figured, you know what, I'll pick them up as well. I didn't think they would cost that much. And getting this guy has been amazing. Barry Windham is the second greatest Galoob action figure of all time. No other Galoob figure outside of Sid Vicious even comes remotely close. I mean, this one does absolutely everything that you need from an action figure. Punching, clotheslining, the perfect body slam pose. Very reminiscent to that of, your Greg Valentine from LJN. I covet the LJN Greg Valentine. I think I have like number 5 on my list. So, of course, this figure is going to rate very high on a list of Galoob action figures. Just an absolute perfect figure. A 10 out of 10. You couldn't get any better. The only thing, if you wanted to make this a better figure, the only thing I would recommend is, give him more of a design. Black trunks, black shoes, just a very simple color scheme. But it doesn't need it. I mean, it's fighting gear. It's a wrestling figure. What else do you really need? The pose is what I covet. The pose is ideal for an action figure. And he is one of the best. So, a very generic quote. A powerful member of the Four Horsemen. We mentioned him earlier. From Sweetwater, Texas. 6'2", 262 pounds. To me, no way this guy is 260 pounds, but okay. Barry Windham, though. Absolutely amazing. Love the action figure. Perfection. Alright, keeping it flowing. 2. From the Skyscrapers. Literally the greatest wrestling action figure ever produced, period. I don't care if you're talking Galoob. I don't care if you're talking Remco, LJN. It doesn't matter what toy line you're talking about. I don't care if you're talking about My Little Ponies or Legos or any other toys or action figures or anything you could think of. No. This is the greatest toy ever. Not even just action figures. It could be anything. I have such an affection for this toy. And you might think it's so simple, but I don't know. I just had so many fond memories with this action figure. I always loved the pose because he always did so much for me during play. And like I said, not only was he like my go-to action figure, but I didn't always use other Galoobs or Hasbro figures. Like I always had other non-wrestling figures that I would use as wrestlers. So like Panthro from Thundercats, which I didn't know his name, I always called him Thundercat, was a premier wrestling figure where I'd have one-on-one matches, or where I'd have them tag team, or they'd go at it during Royal Rumbles, or he'd be squaring off against the rubber Harry from Harry and the Hendersons, or one of the rubber Bendums from the Incredible Hulk or something like that, So this was just always a great figure to use. Powerhouse. He's a little bit taller, obviously. I think he's like 6'10", if I'm not mistaken. 6'9", 336. Damn, he's from Memphis, Tennessee. That's awesome. But to me, this has always been my all-time favorite figure. When I started collecting LJNs and I saw the Big John Studd figure for the first time, and I looked at it, I'm like, wow. And once I really got an appreciation and a real affection for the LJNs, um, it was really difficult for me because the LJN, Big John Studd, and the Galoob Sid Vicious were such identical figures, or so closely resembling one another, that I'm like, hey, is this Big John Studd figure going to officially replace Sid Vicious as my new favorite figure? And I didn't want that to happen. I've been classifying this guy as my favorite figure for like 3.5 decades almost. And I think no matter what, I think I will always classify Sid Vicious as my number one favorite, regardless. I just have too much enjoyment with the figure over the course of my life to ever, move him out of my top spot. So I think, for the sake of argument, he'll be my George Washington. And if anybody would like to know what I mean, I'll be happy to explain in a later video. Or I might explain in this video. It depends on how much time I have. Well, I'm at 21 minutes. I'll explain in a later video. If anybody doesn't know what that means, I'll mention it. But Sid Vicious. Again, look at that. Just there's certain figures that just resonate so well on card, and this was such an important piece to get. Alright. Moving on to Dudes with Attitude. The Stinger. There are certain characters that will always resonate with me when it comes to WCW. Why? Because anytime I turned on, I believe it was TBS and WCW was on, there were always certain wrestlers that were always coming down the aisle or in the ring doing battle. Legion of Doom, the Nasty Boys, Steiner Brothers, most definitely. Ric Flair was always in there. Sting was always in there. Vader was always in there. That's another thing that gets me. I didn't research it, but maybe someone can answer this for me. Was Vader in WCW in 1990? Because you would think that if Sting and Ric Flair got figures in 1990 and Vader was part of the company in that time frame, why wouldn't he have gotten a figure at the same time? So I'm thinking he would have had to come into the company around 92 or so, would make the most sense, because I remember being really young watching Vader in the WCW. And Vader is one of the key wrestlers of the company, so there's just no reason why he wouldn't have gotten a WCW Galoob figure. So, and then later on with Hasbro, he had to have come into WWF after 1994, maybe 95, 96, because again, why would he not have been given a Hasbro figure when a guy can walk into the owner's office, choke him out, and still get an action figure himself? But one of the best monsters of my life, Big Van Vader, couldn't get an action figure. And I'm not talking about, Jack's Classic Superstars, because he's got multiple figures from that line. But nothing from Hasbro, nothing from Galoob. Vader deserved an action figure. So I'd be surprised, or I would love to learn why he would have gotten a figure during that time frame. Sting, absolutely love the character. Sting is to WCW what Hulk Hogan is to WWF. He is the face of the franchise, the most beloved character of all time among WCW. I don't care how much of a fan of Ric Flair you are, or the Steiner Brothers, or any of those other guys that have ever come and gone. No, Sting, he is your go-to guy. And oddly enough, back in the day when he tag teamed with Ultimate Warrior, he wasn't even a legitimate wrestler back in the day. He and Dingo Warrior were just like a couple, gym rats that basically got into wrestling because they were big buff guys and didn't really have any technique. Legion of Doom, Road Warriors, same thing. But, they learned, they crafted their talent and became an amazing wrestler and one of my favorites. Love the wrestler. I can't stand his figure. In fact, I think the Sting is, again, a terrible pose. The only thing that's good about this figure is because this right here that is exactly famous. You know, Sting is famous for friggin' power slamming Ric Flair. This figure is specifically made for Ric Flair and Sting to battle together. That's it. Kind of an awesome little design on the pants with the scorpion. You know, face paint is amazing. If these arms were spread out like Sid Vicious, hands down, 9 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10, maybe even 10 out of 10. But because of the closeness of the hands, it makes it a bad figure, and that's why I give it probably a 5 out of 10. So, I mentioned Series 1 had 12 figures, 12 wrestlers, but 13 figures. Why? Not only did you have Sting in blue, but you had Sting in salmon as well. And in Series 2, you actually have the same figure in black. So, you are going to see this particular figure 3 times. But I'm going to pull the black figure for the Series 2 review. And so, it depends on who you ask, because I'm kind of thrown off. Because some people classify this as Series 2, and I've heard some people classify the black pants as Series 1. But when you look it up, they have this as Series 1 and black pants as Series 2. So it's kind of confusing me. And when you look at the back of the card of the black pants Sting, it has the same exact background. So were all 3 figures released in Series 1? I don't know. I never had these figures as a kid, so I really have no idea when they were released. So I'm still going to assume that blue and salmon were released in Series 1, black in Series 2. Same exact deal. No change outside of the coloring. So I'll give you up close and personal to the face paint. And then change of the scorpion. I think I like the I call it peach colored pants, but sometimes people call it salmon pants. I don't know what salmon is. I'd rather call it orange or pink than salmon, but whatever. Alright, so we are at 28 minutes. Yeah. I'm going to do one more figure. And the last one, not the best carded figure, but I bought it because, well, I wanted a carded Lex Luger, and I got this one back when I didn't have too many carded Galoobs. And besides, Lex Luger Galoob is one of my most hated action figures of all time. This is a figure I had as a kid. Just like Ron Simmons, I had it, I played with it, I absolutely despised it. One of the worst figures ever created. You got to pretend to sit there and you got to pretend to throw a punch and everything. Really, the only thing you do is like a DDT. But you got to sit there, pretend to do a body slam and everything. It's just not a fun, figure to work with. And when I was a kid playing with this, it just irked me to no end. And Ron Simmons might be the worst action figure ever created. Maybe even worse than the Rick Rude LGN. But this right here, when I made my list of top 10 worst action figures ever, yeah, Lex Luger Galoob, he definitely deserved to be on that list. This was just a really bad figure. And, these designers, they were kids once. They know how to play with toys. So my question is, why would they create these things knowing very well how they're going to be utilized? And they know that nobody is going to be able to do anything with this. It's just terrible. 6'5". Where's he from? Boca Raton, Florida. Human torture rack. Wow. One of the most infamous dudes with attitude. Yeah, I'll give him that. And of course, just like the Four Horsemen, dudes with attitude also get a US dual card release. So that's pretty awesome. Again, not the best shaped card, but I mean, you try to go on eBay, buy these dual cards, you're looking to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Depending on the seller, you know, some sellers are asking ridiculous money. I'm talking like $800 or $1,200 for something like this. So if you hold off and if you find the right seller, you might find one on auction and get it for like a couple $100 or something. So, but me being impatient, sometimes I've actually offered sellers like one seller $800, and I offered him like $500 for it, and he wouldn't take it, and I ended up buying a set on auction for like $100, like maybe a week or so later. So, I mean, there are people that really shoot themselves in the foot because they're never going to sell the product that they have, and I just think they really have it listed just to list it and see if it sells, it sells. But I don't think they really have any intention on selling the items, because why else would they sell it for so much, you know? At least that's my thinking. But that's only, what do we look at? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 characters. So we got another 6 characters in the next video. That will complete Series 1. And then we'll move on to Series 2. Will I make all the videos today, or will I separate the videos into separate days? I don't know. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this first video, and I'm glad I finally came down here to make this video, because I really want. I've been talking about this video for the longest time, and I really want to knock this out because I want to get into the Remcos, and I really want to do the Hasbros as well, and I want to have all of them posted within the next month or so. So hopefully everything will be completed by August 1st. All right. Thank you for watching, everybody. And I will talk to you in the comments and see you in the next video. Goodbye, everyone.